Welcome to the BFG webinar series. Tonight, we're bringing you Bridging the Gap, How Parents Can Support Career Success After College. My name is Eric Brotman, and for those of you who don't know me, I am the Chairman and Chief Growth Officer of BFG Financial Advisors with offices in Lutherville, Maryland and Durham, North Carolina. I am very pleased to be joined by the career coach, Kristen Worrall, if I can change the screen here. Kristen, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience because you're a new face for all of our listeners.
Yeah, sure. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for having me. Um, I am currently a career coach and I specialize in young professionals, so kind of like in their early 20s through early 30s. I have been in recruiting, HR, management for over 20 years, I'm afraid to say. I also have two teenage boys, so I am very much in the throes of college and trying to figure out what their careers might be at some point too. I worked for 10 years at Rowe Price, managing recruiting teams, and then for 10 years at Google. And then just made the switch into career coaching about 2 years ago.
Well, I also have a high schooler, only one, not two, and am in the throes of this too. And of course, we've helped hundreds, if not 1,000 plus families deal with this type of scenario. So today, we're going to approach some of the scenarios that face young professionals, really sort of the finishing college and getting to the next step. And Kristen, what I thought we would do is I'm going to let you take a coaching angle on each of these, and then I'll take sort of a financial planning on each of these. We have 6 or so scenarios to talk about. Sarah Losi is in the background, and if you have any questions, you can put them in the bottom right chat area, and she will gladly interrupt us if there are questions during the program. And if not, at the end, if we have time, we will do some Q&A as well. So if you have questions, please put them in that chat box. And Kristen, let's start with the launch gap.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a real gap right now in terms of support in careers for this age group in particular. And it's tough because a lot of these students, they are very high performing, went to great schools, really, um, used to success and also used to coaching, used to sports coaches, SAT tutors, college admissions support, you name it. So there's a lot of support that they're used to. And then they get into their first career and unless they kind of hit the jackpot and get a really great manager, which unfortunately there aren't as many as there need to be, or they have a mentor that actually takes an interest in their career, they're probably not going to get a lot of support. And what's really curious is then once you hit managerial level and C-suite, right back to the coaching again. That's when the companies actually will fund coaches. Um, so it picks back up again, but then you've got this, this young professional cohort that actually really needs support and needs some guidance, and they're just usually not getting it. Just to mention too, the pandemic has exacerbated this. So many students graduating and then in this like weird remote work situation where they're not seen. So they're doing all the work. They're throwing it in, and their bosses are getting it, but they're not actually meeting each other and they're not really seeing who these people are. They're not getting the water cooler conversations to actually get to know their coworkers, and then there was higher unemployment. So kind of from the get-go, that has led to growth stagnation and then maybe getting off on a flat foot with their careers.
So, it's interesting that the high support environment goes away. This is the safety net conversation. And there are a couple of different trigger points here for financial matters that families need to think about. One, of course, is where their 21, 22-year-old son or daughter is going to live. There's the boomerang conversation. Do they move home? Do they stay there where they can save some money while they're not earning a whole lot necessarily early in their careers? If the career isn't local, Is that an apartment? Do they need roommates? Do they know people in the city they might be moving to? There's a lot of housing issues in terms of what is affordable and what makes sense and where are they? And of course, how long are they going to be there? Most of the time, it means an apartment. These young folks with their first job typically are not buying homes, nor should they be. They should be doing apartments. The other thing is student loans. I mean, 6 months after you graduate, the student loan bill comes and it hits you like a sledgehammer. And a lot of times parents want to try and be a resource for their kids, but may or may not be able to help with some of those payments, and kids might be on their own. And sometimes that means refinancing these notes or consolidating them or just figuring out which one to pay off first. I mean, if you've got different notes for different semesters, it can be a real cluster. And so figuring out how to handle that. And then lastly, you show up at your first job and you're presented with, here's your employee handbook, here are your benefit choices. And it's, phone books, it's hundreds of pages of stuff. And hey, we need this back by Friday. Please pick all your benefits. And people who've been in the workforce 10 years don't normally do that very well, but people who are brand new have no shot. Which health plan should you be in? Do you need disability insurance? Are you paying for life insurance for any reason? What other benefits? Is there an HSA? Are there FSAs? Are there other types of things? Gym memberships, stock options. I remember I got my first job out of college, and the first thing I did when I got that guide was what a lot of young people do. I called my father. And God love him, but he gave me horrendous advice about health insurance because he told me what health insurance would have made sense for him, not would have made sense for me. A lot of times, if you're young and healthy, you don't want to pay for some PPO and spend a lot of money on premiums. You're better off with a high deductible plan, and you're better off saving some money on premiums and starting to build some wealth that way. There was also a stock option plan, an employee stock purchase. I could have bought stock at a discount and didn't because I thought, well, that's down the road. I don't need to worry about that. Retirement's forever from now, which, by the way, forever is getting closer and closer. But the benefit piece, don't ask mom and dad. You can't ask HR. There are coaches, consultants, and financial advisors. And if your financial advisor hasn't already offered, ask him or her, would you chat with my daughter or my son about what they need to do now that they've gotten their first job? Because it is complicated. Let's move on to the second piece. So after they've launched, now they have a new problem or a new potential problem in underemployment.
Right. And unfortunately, underemployment is nothing new, but it is starting to hit degreed people with more frequency. Um, the underemployment percentage right now is the highest that it's been since the pandemic. It's 43%.
Hmm.
So, you've got that happening. And then I'm sure, and we're going to talk more about AI, a little bit later in the conversation, but, you know, 66% of organizations right now they're reducing entry level hiring. So you also just have fewer jobs. So what is
Mhm.
that doing? It's forcing these, degreed students to go find jobs that, they normally wouldn't be taking. And then they're going to be, not paid as much. Um, it really puts them again on the back foot where they don't have as many opportunities and they're going to take a job but it's not really going to be to their highest potential, and not only does that take a toll on their longer term career trajectory, right, because they're already starting here when they should be here. What did that degree do for them? They're supposed to be here, but they're also having more frustration, right? Like how frustrating is it when you have a degree and you're going in and doing work that is not what you wanted to do. And so that's a really frustrating and unfortunately more common situation that we're seeing today.
Yeah, we hear that a lot from clients whose kids they've done all the right things. They've gotten into good colleges. They've gotten good degrees or degrees at something. They're trying to find jobs. You talk about AI, and again, we will come back to that. But it is hard to even get your resume seen because of the filters that are automated. You can't even get your resume looked at by a human without knowing someone. So it puts more pressure on the network. So what can mom and dad do? Well, they can introduce you to someone they know in that field if they know someone. If my daughter decides on marine biology, I don't know any marine biologists. I don't know what in the world I would do to point her in the right direction. If she's in finance, she's in good shape. We can help with that. And the Gen Zs and millennials have figured out the side hustle. which is where you can get a position. Maybe it's not making the kind of money you want to make. And by the way, my first job paid me so little. It was embarrassing. It was less than a year of school, but that was the deal. And I think that might still very much be true. But we hadn't invented the side hustle yet, us Gen Xers. As you well know, that wasn't a thing. Now it's really likely that somebody can be working in their field, making less money than maybe they thought they would, at least initially, but would also have some side gig, whether it's freelance work or other things, just to close the gap and pay the bills. It's a real challenge for folks, and parents a lot of times want to help their kids. It's one thing to say, "Oh, my kid isn't launching." Well, here's somebody whose son or daughter is launching. They're doing great. They're doing all the right things, and they still can't land on their own feet, at least not initially, and that's disheartening. You talk about how it can affect their career long time. It can also affect their sense of well-being and their sense of pride in their work, and so there's issues there. But from a financial standpoint, this is the spot where, sadly, it is still who you know, not what you know. Your resume won't get you in most doors, and I'm sure you're advising folks, even if they have their first job, don't burn any bridges. Keep those networks. Make sure you
Well,
get a recommendation somewhere, right?
that's right. Don't burn any bridges, but also, it is so important to be building those networks and building those relationships.
Hmm.
That hasn't changed. If anything, I think that's getting more important and more critical because the people who can break through are the ones that are getting noticed, right? And one thing I've really noticed about this generation in particular, and I'm sure the parents have seen it too, they are more comfortable behind a screen, most of them. It's a default to wanna be texting, it's a default to wanna be, if I don't have to be there in person, I'd much rather just kinda sit behind my computer, but it really is so critical that they be building relationships, getting to know people, and networking.
Yes, LinkedIn is an incredibly valuable thing. It is more than just a snapshot and a resume. It is a way to build relationships, to get introduced to people. And a lot of times for young people, social media is kind of a mess. It's pictures of them doing silly things in high school or college or other things. LinkedIn should not be that. LinkedIn should be the professional version of yourself. And scrubbing your social media before you apply to jobs isn't a bad piece of advice either, because there can be some stuff out there you're less proud of now as you're trying to get into the workforce, right?
100%. Yes. And I would say even before then, I'm trying to get my kids to do that now, like to be really, really careful because
Yeah.
it has a footprint and you never know who's going to find it.
Good advice. So let's talk about the next step. Now you've gotten into the workforce and you are working yourself to fatigue. Let's talk about burnout.
Yeah, and I mean, very much set up by the last two topics that we've been discussing. You're underemployed, you're trying to get noticed. And then, if you are remote or you aren't in the office all the time, there's a lack of direction. Sometimes there's a lack of feedback. So you're not really clear. Am I doing well? Am I not doing well? Those human touch points are so important. And if you get into a situation like that, a lot of times the default thinking, especially when you're younger, is I'll just work harder. I'll work really, really, really hard. I'll work extra hours. I'll log in at 10 p.m. so my boss can see me online.
Hmm.
Um, you know, that's not going to do it. All that that's going to do is burn you out, right? And then you're not your best, and then you're going to get frustrated. You're going to get, it's really difficult when you're in a position and you're trying really hard. But man, if you're working yourself to the bone, it's never the answer. And I know, yes, you have to work hard. I'm 100%, especially when you're young and you're in that first job or second job. The output's important, but unless you're working smarter alongside of working harder, it's not going to get you promoted. It's not going to get you noticed. You actually have to really be thinking about, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. How are you managing up? How are you figuring out how the office politics work, right? Like that's working smarter.
Sadly, that's a reality, particularly in larger companies where there's a lot of hierarchy and a lot of stepping on those career ladders. I think there's some exceptions to the burnout conversation. I'm curious how you feel about this. I think, well, if you have the entrepreneurial itch, there's a tendency to live your work yourself almost to death, but it is building something that will eventually pay off. I can tell you that When starting my career, I went an obscene amount of time without a week off. Once I got into the entrepreneurship, when I was working for a company, I was using that paid time off and everything else like anybody else. But once I was an entrepreneur and I was working for myself, I found myself working all the time.
Uh,
And I did that. I think I did that so that I would get to the point where I didn't have to do that anymore, which at least in my case now is very much true. I also think the time to work the longer hours is when you're not married, you don't have kids, you don't have responsibilities outside of work. You can embed yourself in that, maybe even enhance it with graduate school or other career enhancements,
yeah.
and just do it for a short term. But you sure as heck don't want to do it forever because you will look like this poor human on the screen, which none of us want to look like. I mean, but I do think there's some exceptions. I think when you're young and hungry, if you can find a mentor, if you can find somebody whose work you can enhance by sort of living it for a short period of time, I think that can make a difference. But you definitely don't want to sign up to be a workaholic. That's unhealthy.
No, right. And I mean, I guess thinking about from the financial angle, it's a similar analogy where, you need to build the capital earlier so that you have that interest compounding over time. A job is very similar. So you want to work hard and you definitely want to put those hours in early in your career because A, you have to, and B,
Hmm.
that's what's going to build your credibility and all of that. But what I have found, and actually just recently coached somebody who is in a startup and working so hard and actually just getting to the point where she was waking up at 3 in the morning, tears before work, really, really frustrated because she wasn't getting noticed. And she's like, I'm doing all this work. I'm doing all this work. They're going to notice it. And I feel like that's such a default, like they're going to notice it because in school they noticed it. If did good work, you got an A, right? Like that's how it worked. It
Yeah, yeah.
shifts when you get into early career. And so, we worked together to really get her to understand what was going on and how she needed some more visibility and really to get noticed. It needs to go hand in hand.
There are ways to do that and to sort of advance in your career, which we're going to talk about in a minute. I do think that's a valuable lesson to learn. Sometimes the reward for being really good and working hard is more work from somebody else who's not doing a great job. That can be really deflating to feel like, my gosh, I'm carrying this whole team. And so for people in cultures and work cultures where that happens, that's disenfranchising in every way. I mean, the idea that I'm being rewarded for my good work by doing somebody else's work so they
Yeah.
can go home, that's not great. Now, maybe that's an advancement strategy, but it sure wouldn't be the first 10 choices of advancement strategy I would look for, right?
Mm.
Let's talk about advancement. Advancing in a career. Here are the ladders. Everybody knows the ladder metaphor, so let's talk about it.
Yeah. Um, so if you are mismatched or underemployed, right, in the wrong field, it's going to be difficult to advance, right? Already on the back foot. We've been talking about that. But honestly, even if you're in the right field, it can be difficult to advance. You know, I feel that young professionals just often don't understand how the system works. And it's not just young professionals. So, tell you a little
Hmm.
story. When I was working at Google, I'd been there for a couple of years, and they came to me and said, "All right, we need you and your team to hire 2,000 people in 6 months." And I had a team of 5 people, and I was like, I don't know how you expect me to do that. Figure it out. So I had to go out and find, basically, beg, borrow, and steal other people from different departments, assembled a team of 65 people, trained them in 3 weeks, and then we did it. We delivered 2,000 hires in 6 months, right? And this was to fuel our growth in cloud sales, which we were on the back foot. I don't know if you remember, 5 or 6 years ago, Google was behind Microsoft and Amazon, and now Google's really, well, thanks to me and my team, but we all worked so hard, and in that process, I was able to cut our hiring process time in half. I got a 96% approval rating from the candidates that we worked with, so they were really happy with our delivery, and 92% of the managers said we did well. And so I'm like, I did it. I have arrived. I have done the impossible. The promotion, it's coming. No promotion. Didn't happen.
Right.
And I couldn't believe it. And I felt so betrayed. And I went to my boss. I was like, what? What? She said, well, we haven't discussed it yet. I haven't socialized it. You don't have sponsors. I'm like, why do I need that? Do they not see what I just did? Like, no, we need to, you're not ready. And so I learned a
Wow.
really hard lesson, and I
You
also
sure
saw it
did.
with a lot of people that I worked with at Google and managed that and that's a big office environment. It will be different in smaller environments and things like that, but it is really important to own your career and to have a personal brand and to really control that narrative and make sure that you are in the position you think you're in, you know?
So a couple thoughts on this, and I'm sort of trying to look at this through the lens of what parents can do for their kids as well.
Mhm.
That's sort of the we have so many parents who want to help their kids get off on the right start, whether it's educationally, professionally, financially, socially, all kinds of things. Not to necessarily be helicopter or concierge parents, but just because you're doting, you care how your kids do, and I think to advance in your career, it has to begin before your career even starts. And some of that is the internships,
Mhm.
finding a way to get a little bit of experience when you're in high school or in college in some field that's somehow relevant to it. I'm not suggesting that it's not noble to take a job that also pays some bills, particularly if you're paying for school yourself. But having an internship, whether paid or unpaid, can create those relationships. Another thing is when you go to a company, it's perfectly reasonable to try and discern what the career path might look like because no one wants to be in an entry job forever. It's not like you're going to show up for your first day and say, "So when do I get that corner office I've been coveting?" That's not how it works either. It's a building process, but understanding a career path, understanding the expectations, understanding whether it's an apprenticeship or an entry level role, is there room to grow in this organization? Is there a ladder even available? And are there people who've climbed it? In our firm, we try when we bring young people in, we bring them in with this 3 to 5 year almost apprenticeship before they're ready for the next step of their career, but they know what the steps are. And they have people they can talk to who did it and have done it successfully and can say, yes, this is real and it works and we can do it. I think it's also helpful. You mentioned a mentor some bit ago. Having a mentor at work is so important, or an accountability partner,
Mhm.
somebody who you said a sponsor at Google. This isn't sponsorship in most organizations, but it is mentorship. And then I have bad news for the students out there, which is education doesn't typically end after college. And that doesn't mean everybody needs a master's degree, but it does mean that when you graduate at 21, the skill set you're going to need in 10 or 20 or 30 years is not the same skill set you graduate with. Now that I'm in my 50s, I look back and so many of the things that we did in college are not even relevant now. The technology is different, the delivery is different, the population's different, the world's different.
Yeah.
So, there are college majors now that didn't exist then, lots of them. And how many millennials went through and being a web designer became their major in some way, and now web design can be an AI thing in 4 seconds. And maybe I'm exaggerating a little, but my point is that there are things that get outsourced or where technology replaces you, and you need new skills. So plan on being in school forever. Education's a continuum. You have to build those skills to advance your career. That's my opinion.
I agree with that completely, and I would also say that what's becoming more and more important, again, with AI emerging, it's always been important, but this concept of durable capability, so skills that compound over time. When you are thinking about what the world needs, more and more, excuse me, AI can code, AI can do technical things. But what it can't do is have curiosity or truly be creative or have resilience, problem solving a little bit, but like relationship management, strategic thinking. Those are things as parents that you can be discussing, with your kids all the way through, and that's good parenting too. But those are the same skills, those durable skills that are going to guide you through your career and make you a successful person.
So before we get to the next slide, the next topic, I want to ask you a loaded question that you weren't expecting.
Okay,
Only
hit me.
because what could be more fun in a live webinar than a question out of left field that you weren't expecting? I have some feelings on this, but I'm not sure my feelings are valid because it's not what I do for a living. Are there some majors or some programs that simply aren't worth, from an ROI standpoint or a career standpoint, that aren't worth doing? Are there, is choosing a major really about the return on investment and the job possibilities, or is it about personal growth and education for its own sake? I mean, are we losing the humanities? That's about a 14-point question, but I'm just curious the role of traditional educational path as opposed to somebody saying, I'm skipping college, I'm going to learn the trades, I'm going to make a bunch of money young, I'm going to avoid student loans, I'm going to have a great career. But also the people who go for 4 years, borrow a ton of money, and come out with an art history degree. And by the way, I'm not beating on the art history majors. I'm an English major. So people said, what are you going to do with that? And I was like, well, hopefully anything I want. But it's still not a traditional thing. You don't look at an English major as being a springboard to your next career. So how do you tie the desire to study things you enjoy with recognizing that college is a massive investment financially?
Yeah, no, and it really is so expensive today. I was an English major as well. So I think we're both testaments that liberal arts degrees can pay off. And actually, liberal arts degrees are actually becoming more and more touted as an antidote to AI,
Mm,
because of the critical thinking. Like if you look at a software engineering degree and the value of that 20 years ago compared to today, they still need software engineers, but they need fewer and they need them with different skill sets. And from everything that I am seeing in the market and the people I'm speaking to, again, it is this human side of
hmm
work that is becoming more and more critical. AI can help with repeatable tasks. It can help, make your life easier, but if you don't have the critical thinking capability in the office space, that's going to become more and more important over time. So there is some thought that liberal arts degrees are actually coming back. Now,
Huh.
I think it depends on the student, right? Like, absolutely. There are so many great opportunities right now with the boomers retiring, right? And they've got these legacy businesses, electricians and plumbers, and they've already got a book of business and a way to facilitate all of that. And their kids typically don't want to take those businesses over. So that's a great opportunity, right? For a kid who is like, look, I don't want to do 4 years. I really want to build a business. I mean, that's a great opportunity right now.
Yeah.
So I think it just depends, honestly. And I hope that's not like too, much of a fluffy answer, but it just depends on the student and really what they want out of life. I am still a proponent of the 4-year degree, if you can afford it, because those critical thinking skills, I think they're so important over time, and that intellectual curiosity that just sets the foundation for the rest of your life.
All right, Kristen, I'm not going to call you fluffy, but we will move on to the next slide. How's that?
Sure.
Let's talk about the missing middle. And this is you started, or you alluded to this in the very beginning, and I think it's kind of a big deal that suddenly you're on your own.
Yeah, well, I mean, for sure. And, I think you look at all of these challenges and, sometimes I feel a bit sorry for this generation. They get called like the snowflake generation, or, they've got a lot of pressure that they're dealing with, and a lot of things like we've just discussed. There's almost like this confidence crisis with this
Mm,
generation. Um, and you were speaking, Eric, before about just how difficult it is to get a job. And that is 100% true, and it's getting harder, unfortunately. Um,
mhm.
you have to fill out 90 applications on average before you're going to get a job offer. 90. And 25% of those job applications, you're ghosted. Nobody actually calls you back. It just literally goes into a black hole. And so if you can imagine, if you're a job seeker and you're doing this day in and day out, how demoralizing and how just frustrating that process is. Um, but what you don't see on the outside, and what I can tell you from having worked in corporate recruiting environments, is that their systems are broken, their processes are broken. These are, legacy systems that were built 20, 30 years ago. And then their workflows stay the same, but as hiring changes, they don't really change the workflows. They just kind of slap band-aids on them. What that basically means is it's that much harder to apply for a job because it just gets stuck in the wrong places. It's not really getting to the people that need it. The recruiters have to spend more time doing rework, so they have less time to review resumes. I mean, it's a real problem. And now you have AI interfaces sitting on top of it, screening resumes out, but they're not integrated into that workflow either. It's
Mm.
literally sitting on top, and it is a big problem right now. So that frustration is real. Um, you know, I I think what I tell my clients, the more targeted you are in your job search, the less frustrated you will be, and the more likelihood that you're going to get called back. And that means putting in more time up front, but really getting clear on what you want, setting that target list of organizations, using your network to get in the back door of those organizations, and customizing that resume to the job description as much as you can honestly. Those are the things that you really need to do. But it's not spamming and throwing it into a million black holes. It's actually getting more focused and more specific about what you want and going after it from a million different angles.
It has to be frustrating for this generation. It has to be. I mean, first of all, it's harder to get into college than it was when we went.
Yep.
It just is. And it's harder for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that the pool of applicants is so much bigger and the schools have only grown so much. So that's an issue. It's also prohibitively expensive. So some of the folks who get into a school can't actually go. And then the common application
Mhm.
has changed the ability to apply. I only applied to 4 schools. Kids today apply to 20 and 30 schools, which means application process, they're seeing more of them, hence the need for AI to weed some of them out in some cases. When we post a job, and we use LinkedIn a lot to post jobs, we get an absurd number of resumes that are completely irrelevant to what we're trying to hire for.
Right.
Like, so not only do applicants sometimes feel like they're getting lost in the spam, recruiters feel like they're getting spammed all the time by resumes that have nothing to do with what we're trying to accomplish. So you have to weed it out, and it is a two-way street, I think. And then you get into the company. There's a couple things I want to talk about just from a culture standpoint, because I think culture really matters when you're in a role. We talked about mentoring. I do think coaching is important. I mean,
Mhm.
executive coaching is as old as time. I mean, executives have the money, the resources, maybe the support to hire coaches, and a lot of times middle managers or entry level folks don't have that. And so you talk about something parents can do. You're a perfect example of someone who can help guide in a very professional way, someone who is upwardly mobile but doesn't know how to get there. So I think that's kind of cool. I also think that companies that do retreats and team building and that believe in culture can be a warmer, fuzzier, closer to the college experience today than the workforce experience. My career started at Legg Mason, and my first new employee training. I've never experienced anything like this in my life, but since. But I went into new employee training, and the person giving this new employee training speech was 6'4", massive human with the white shirt, red tie, blue suit. He was right out of the catalog. And there were about 20 of us sitting around the table. We were the hiring class for that year. And he came in, he was a big, imposing person, and he said, all of you just spent an enormous amount of time and money to get a degree. You're going to learn more here in 6 months than you learned there in 4 years. You should be paying us for the privilege of being here. And that's the last I want to talk about salaries. So to feel like a piece of garbage, that's the PG version of what we felt like, is an
Mhm.
understatement. I wasn't there a full year. I was
Mhm.
looking for work by the time I knew where my desk was, because that was immediate. I was like, well, super. I recognize that you come in at the bottom, but if the bottom is subterranean and you're literally treated like there's
Yeah.
no value at all. I spent a year there. I couldn't wait to leave. And I met some nice people there, but in 8 months, Kristen, I had seniority in my department. The
Mhm.
turnover was so rampant that
Mhm.
after I'd been there 8 months, I was the senior most member of a department of 5 people. That's absurd.
Right.
It's absurd. And lastly, I think there's a difference between intelligence and wisdom. And young people today trade. If you've read Arthur Brooks From Strength to Strength, you know that young people today have to trade on intelligence because they haven't developed the wisdom yet.
Mhm.
but their older counterparts, older
Mhm.
meaning our age, sadly, have to trade on wisdom rather than intelligence because we are now, we've seen it all, but we're not on the latest cutting edge.
Yeah.
So if you can find a mentor as a young person, if you can find somebody 20 or 30 years older than you even, to take an interest in you where you can help one another because you're on the cusp, whether you're a surgeon or you're a librarian makes no difference. Whatever field you're in, you know the latest and greatest. You just got a formal education. You know how stuff works. You can integrate technology. You know how things work. The older generation may not be as good with any of that. But certainly, AI is going to separate the haves from the have-nots from that standpoint.
For
The
sure.
older generation's going, I want nothing to do with that. And the younger generation's going, it can do everything for me and I'm in. And so there's something in between. But finding somebody with the wisdom to marry your intelligence to, I think early in your career is super important.
I mean, I don't think it can be overstated. And, it's a win-win for both parties too, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
if you're the wise one and you don't know how to use AI effectively, there's a lot of cross-pollination that can occur there when it comes to the learnings. But I completely agree. And what's frustrating is that, I think it's 75% of young professionals do not have a mentor. Aged 18 to 25 do not have a mentor.
I'm surprised it's not more. It's
Yeah,
75. I would have said it was 95.
yeah, those 25% who do have it, they're the leg up that they have compared to the 75% who don't, it's immeasurable, and it really is important. I mean, coaching, mentorship, things have changed so much, and the world is a different place today, and that's not gonna change right now, but those skills are still so critical. Relationship building, relationship management, really understanding kind of the strategy and the wisdom of how things work behind the scenes. You can waste all this time as a young person and just not even know it exists. When you've got
Yeah.
somebody like in our shoes who's like, oh, this is what's actually going on. And let me take you, under my wing and help you avoid those mistakes that I made when I was your age, right? It really is critical. And it doesn't have to be a paid coach, certainly can be, but even if they are finding mentors, a family friend, somebody who's just
Mhm.
willing to take an interest and help guide them, there's just such a gap in terms of the things that really will make you a success. That you just can't learn it any other way. You either have to go through it or somebody's got to be able to help you figure it out.
Would you say that a mentor should not be someone you're related to, particularly if you're contemplating a family business and being involved in the family business, that you also find somebody outside of those four walls who's going to be a little more objective and maybe a little harder on you than somebody within that ecosystem?
I mean, ideally, yes, and obviously, nope, they never want to hear it from their parents, right? Yeah, I think it's better received if they actually have somebody who is not as
Mhm.
close to them. It's a little more credible, and it isn't as close to, the personal.
Well, this is the perfect segue to talk about the role of coaching because number one, we have a coach with us. And number two, this is really where parents can say, well, how can I get my young person there? And we're back to the ladders again. I didn't think I realized that we use the ladders twice, but why not? Let's do that. Talk about coaching.
Well, I like the ladders, especially that guy that's kind of floating over. Whatever shortcut he figured out, that would probably be the way to go. But
He's actually falling.
sorry, I have a dog barking in the background.
I think he's I think he's falling, but that's all right.
Okay. Oh, is he? Okay.
It looks like he's about to wipe out, but who
Yeah.
knows?
So, yeah, so coaching, it's something that used to just be a corporate situation, right? Where the corporate people would pay for you to have a coach, and usually it's at the executive level or the managerial level. But that has shifted a lot over the last few years, where now you have about 47% of coaches actually direct to consumer. And it's because of, I think, just this need now where there is such a disconnect in terms of, young people coming in and just not really being clear. They need the help. And 20% of coaches are geared towards young professionals. That's it. So it's growing because I think people are seeing the need, but it's a smaller percentage of coaches that actually do focus on young professionals. Um, I've been managing, hiring, parenting for so many years. I find coaching so rewarding and so useful. I started doing it while I was at Google. They have a coaching program at Google, and I loved it so much that I got certified there. Then I got certified externally. And now I really love working with young professionals because I can see the impact it makes. I really, it's a great feeling, right, to be able to help. So, but what coaching really is, and the way that I coach in my practice, know thyself, I think is the most important thing, especially if you're a young person. Really figure out, what are your values? What is important to you? So many people go into jobs, or, they launch, or they pick a major, and they don't really think about what's important to me. Like, what are my unshakable values, the things in life that really mean something to me? And then what is your inner authority? Who is the person inside that is like, this is who I really am, and this is what I really want. And then, just as important, but not as much fun to really dive into, is helping people figure out who are their inner underminers, right? Like, we all have those saboteurs in our head that actually like to tell us lies about things, and, really derail us in what it is that we really know to be true, but it's saying, "You can't do that. Why would you think you could possibly go and become a doctor?" Like, so it's really getting them to understand those core parts of themselves, so that they can feel sovereign in who they are and really understand, this is who I am. Once they figure that out, it's almost like the rest becomes easy. You're either going to pivot, right? You're going to decide, I'm in the wrong field, wrong job. This is not going to work for me. And then coaching really helps them through all of the execution steps, right? So it's figuring out, how to write the best resume, how to position yourself in the marketplace, how do you negotiate an offer, like the execution phase. Or you're going to ascend in your current position, right? Hey, I'm happy where I am, but I'm not where I want to be. I'm underemployed. I want to get promoted. How do I do that? And so then the role of coaching is about brand management, and how to manage up to your manager, and how to work with your peers, and the path to promotion, those sorts of things. And it really is useful. It helps a lot. But these are all things that parents can do, with their own kids, or if you take an interest and you're a sponsor to a younger person, these are things that you can help with too. I think especially that values piece, and really helping them figure out, who am I, what's important to me. Um, Assessments can help too, and those are things that you can
Hmm.
actually get online, right? They have Clifton Strengths Finders is a great
Hmm.
assessment. I think it's only $50 to take it, to do the full report. And that just gives a lot of insight into a person's strengths, who they are, what's important to them. I use a Hogan assessment in my practice, which is much more involved, and is usually reserved kind of for the C-suite, but it goes really deep, and it explains like what your reputation is, and so you can really hone in on your reputational risks, and what you can do to get ahead of those things.
It's funny. I was thinking this whole time that there's a difference between internal and external coaching, and that internal coaches often aren't going to help you with your resume to leave the firm. So having an external coach is a little more objective than having somebody inside. But at our company, we use a system of accountability partners. And the reason we do that is that people can choose somebody, and it's optional, but I think the people who use this, and I'm certainly one of them, gets an enormous amount out of having that one person who you sit down with once a month, and you sort of bounce each other's plans of work and objectives and goals, and just have somebody to talk to. And it can be a peer. It typically is not your direct supervisor, but it can be a peer, and that can be helpful. You mentioned strengths and assessments. I actually think aptitude testing is incredibly valuable. And when we were in school, if you'll recall, it was all about our weaknesses. It was working on the thing you were worst at. So if you were a fantastic at chemistry and physics, they wanted you to work on your English and history. Today, I think we play to our strengths, saying, you know what, if you're really terrific at chemistry, let's embrace that and figure out how you can make that terrific. And I think students are happier as a result of playing to their strengths rather than constantly feeling like they're being highlighted for the things where they struggle. Some people aren't, you're not going to be good at everything, and you're certainly not going to enjoy everything. So between the strengths and the aptitudes, if you can find something that you actually enjoy and you're good at, that's a great foundation for figuring out what you want to be when you grow up, which, by the way, I'm still trying to figure out myself.
It also helps with confidence and being
Uh-huh.
able to articulate that to other people. A lot of things that young professionals struggle with is actually like, how do I talk about myself? How do I brand myself? If you take an assessment and it gives you that information, it's almost like you're holding up a mirror and it's
Hmm.
objective, and you're like, okay, now I actually can say, yeah, I am really good at analytics. It shows right here, and this is why and how, and it gives you the confidence, it gives you the information, but it also really helps you communicate it.
So let's shift to a brief conversation on AI more formally, because it is changing the game in ways that we don't even fully understand or imagine yet. And like any emerging technology, since we went to college before the internet and cell phones and email and all the things, at least I did, you know, this is a game changer and we have to be ready for it, but we also don't really know what it is. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Um, I think we're all struggling with this as humans. It's really hard to wrap your head around the changes that are already here, the changes that are coming. Um, and certainly then to tell a, graduating senior, or somebody who's in high school what to do with their life when there's just this huge disruptive technology that nobody really understands, right? What is it going to do? I think that there are definite low-hanging fruit things that everybody should be doing, which is using AI, right? Like, the successful people are going to be using AI to make themselves more productive, to automate tasks that kind of take a lot of your time but aren't really high level tasks. Use AI when you can to automate those things so that then what are you doing with your time? You're building relationships, you're in front of people, you're studying something to become an expert in it more deeply. Um, so I think if you have kids at home or, who are just recently in a role, that's great advice to give them. They probably know it, but it's just going to help them get a leg up in terms of their peers and how they're using their time. I think also we touched a little bit upon it, but like those durable skills, I like to call it the messy middle. There is this stuff that AI is just not going to get to, and it's not going to be good at it, maybe ever, but certainly for a very long time. Human emotion, really being good with people and being able to influence people, being able to be an active listener and really be able to take all of that information in and know how to give a sophisticated answer back in the workplace. That's going to move you up. Ethical considerations, right? When it comes to the ethics of things, right now, AI is it's so questionable in terms of the ethics. And if you're somebody who can look at it and say, we really need to balance this, we need to focus on these things, that's going to be a valuable skill set to have. It's tough because these are soft skills, right? But they're really critical skills. And I just think if you can look at AI as the way to take the work and collaborate, make it better, but the humans are still going to be the ones that produce the excellence, that really look at the work and say, this is okay, but this is how we need to shape this so that it actually is excellent work. That's going to be a very valuable skill in the next 5 or so years.
I sincerely hope you're right. None of us know. I sincerely hope you're
Yeah.
right. I do wonder though, when we start delegating tasks that we consider relatively routine or simple to a machine where we used to do that to a more junior person, are they getting the fundamental building blocks? Or are we asking young people to skip some of the foundational work and, skip building that foundation and start decorating the upstairs, so to speak? I don't know what the
Yeah.
ramifications long term will be but I find that whenever we skip a step, I mean, think about it as like skipping a grade or skipping. If
Mhm.
you skipped calculus 1 and went directly to calculus 2, you'd have to be awfully smart to somehow catch up and get it, or it's not going to work. And that's true with so
Yeah.
many things. So I do worry about that. At the end of the day, what I tell young people is that if you develop a skill and a passion for something that other people want and are willing to pay for, you'll never starve. Whatever that is, if you
Mhm.
can provide something, whether it be a product or a service or an experience, you provide something that other people want and are willing to pay for, and you're okay. Now, that's the entrepreneur in me. That's not necessarily the corporate ladder piece, but for those folks who are contemplating that, regardless of what your side hustle might be, which might be the spot where you're first trying that, people are willing to pay for things that make their lives better or more efficient, or that are outsourcing things they don't like to do. And
Yes.
and I got to tell you, as a financial advisor, nothing we do can't be done yourself. And I know that's not, people don't want to admit that about what they do, but I'm not a neurosurgeon. What we do, it's the accountability, the empathy, the humanity of it, the wisdom of it, the I've seen this before and I know how to help you navigate that. That's what's priceless. The math problem can be done in 4 seconds.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so so being in any field, being able to stay relevant by handling that personal side, and you brought that up, I thought did a nice job with it. And then in addition to that, recognizing if you're great at something that nobody wants or is willing to pay for, you could starve being great at it,
Yeah.
you know? So
Yeah.
we're almost out of time. If there are some questions, let's put them in the box. Let's put up, you have a QR code, Kristen. Let's get that pull out your phones. Hopefully no one's been multitasking and surfing while we're doing this. Although it's funny because I started this by saying we're here this evening, which is totally weird because it was 10:30 in the morning. So that's been gnawing at me. I'm like, well, this isn't this evening, but if you're watching this on rebroadcast, maybe it is. So I feel better. So tell us about this. Tell us about this code.
Yeah, so this is a link to my landing page. It's actually a very simple landing page because I have a larger, more in-depth website that's under development right now. But if you click this code, you will get link to my LinkedIn if you would like to link in with me and learn more about me and my business. Or you can also book a 30-minute complimentary call where I can, talk to you specifically about your situation, your child's situation, and yeah, and just happy to answer any questions anybody has after this. One to one, there's a lot,
Yeah.
and yeah, I'd be happy to connect with any of you if there's an interest.
I can tell you point blank, I wish I had known someone like you when I was 22 years old. I do because it may have saved me some trouble. I didn't find a mentor till I was about 28. And those 5 or 6 years in between, they were definitive for me. I sure learned a lot, but I could have maybe learned a few things less hard, less the hard way and more, the easy way. Once I found a mentor, life was immediately better
Yeah,
professionally. And I still appreciate him so much. And we're still friends to this day because he took me under his wing. And that's what
yeah,
you need. I really believe that. And now I am that mentor for folks here. And I love that. So, not to be outdone, Kristen, I have a QR code too. It looks almost the same, by gosh. At BFG, one of the things we do is multi-generational planning. And so for our clients, we will do legacy financial plans for the grown kids of our clients. And in a lot of cases, it's very inexpensive because it's very simple. But it gives your 22, 23, 24, or even sometimes younger than that kids a chance to build their own relationship and start with the right habits, whether it's choosing the right benefits or dealing with student loans or figuring out housing, like we talked about in the beginning, or whether it's just beginning to use their 401k or other things properly and starting to do some of that planning. And half of our CFPs here are under 30. Nobody wants their mom or dad's advisor, just like they don't want their mom or dad's doctor or dentist or anything else. So your kids can get a financial plan working with someone who is close enough to being a contemporary of theirs that they can build their own relationship. And if you use this QR code, you'll get to a scheduling link. You can schedule a call with our team anytime. It's, of course, complimentary. and we can talk about how that can benefit you and frankly your family, especially if you want them to not only get off on the right foot, but if you're in a position where you're going to leave money to them, which in a lot of cases our clients are in that position, making sure they're ready for it. Because inheritance is a slippery slope, and a lot of times young people are unprepared to deal with the ramifications of that. So that's the QR code. I hope you'll schedule time with Kristen. I hope you'll schedule time with one of our advisors. The last slide, real quick, Sarah, is the slide to make all of the lawyers happy. I'm not going to read that to you, but it's on screen. You can pause it if you'd like to read it. Let's go back to the title screen with our contact information. Um, I don't think our email addresses are on here. You want to give your email address to the group, Kristen?
It's actually on the QR code,
Oh,
so,
perfect. Perfect.
yep, should be good.
So, Sarah, any questions? Any questions in the chat box? We've got a lot of people here today. That's exciting.
Yeah, a few questions. Can y'all hear me?
Mhm.
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. So you talked a lot about mentors. Where are a few places that either I or my child can go to find a mentor?
It's a great
I
question. You
mean,
want to tackle that first? Go for it.
yeah, sure. This is like a time-old question because it's like, "Will you be my mentor?" Like, it's kinda tough to figure it out, but I think the most natural places to look is kind of within that second ring of friends, right, or family. If you go to church, if you have, you know, coworkers that you work with where you have a nice relationship with them, it's identifying somebody where you already have a relationship and then thinking, "Do they have the qualities that I think would be the right sort of qualities to guide and then to introduce, your child to." And then asking them too, if they have a coach or a teacher or somebody who's been special in their life, if they, haven't, I think if you do go to like cousin uncle level, like that can also be helpful. Um, so yeah, it's just really being thoughtful about who you think the right person might be, and then just saying, "Hey, would you mind?" She could really use some guidance, and I think really highly of you, and I think you would be like a great person to share some wisdom.
I think it's perfectly okay to ask someone if you
Yeah,
take on a mentoring role for me,
yeah.
because asking someone for help and guidance is a sign of respect. It's a sign of appreciation. You're not asking them to give you anything. You're asking them to help guide you. And Sherpas are valuable at every stage of life. So I
Yes.
happen to think it's perfectly okay to be asked, and I have been asked before and have been honored. And I think that's part of paying it forward or paying it back, whichever way you look at it, is as a seasoned person in this field. When young people want to pick my brain, the answer is always yes.
Yeah.
Because when I was 20 something, I called on a lot of people and asked them for some guidance and got it. And I think that matters. And like I said, I didn't have a mentor till I was 28, but I picked a lot of brains along the way to figure things out because people have done it before, and they're going to help you navigate some of the things that maybe can make it a smoother thing for you. So,
People like to be asked, it's true.
oh, it's an honor. It's an
Yeah.
honor to be at. And if they can't do it, that might not mean that they're a jerk. It might just mean that they're overly busy and don't want to let you down, but maybe they know somebody who they can point you in their direction too. So don't take no as rejection. It might be that they're doing you a favor because they weren't going to be attentive. So, that's kind of important too. Sarah, what else?
I think we got time for one last question.
Okay.
Uh, the term hustle culture is very popular right now. Is there any way that I can start bringing that up with my kid and trying to break them of the hustle culture?
Hustle culture. Kristen, I don't even know that term. So apparently I'm
I
very
actually
Gen X.
I don't either, actually.
Well,
I
Sarah
am a
may be able to answer the question.
Hi, resident millennial. Hustle culture is kind of what you talked about before with when you work yourself to the bone and
Yeah.
never take a day off and think that that's going to get you to the next level.
Got it. Got
So
it.
it's try to break that cycle or get
Yeah.
ahead of it so that it doesn't happen. I think having a conversation around work harder or work smarter, not harder, and introducing that idea is really important. And again, if there's somebody successful in your life who has maybe been around the block or has done this before, who can sit down and have a conversation and share kind of how these things work, it's almost like a cautionary tale. And I think you're smart to try to get ahead of it. You don't want them burning out. The path forward really is like figure out what's going on around you. Ask questions instead of just assuming. This is actually a big one. I think so many young people are afraid to ask questions. So instead of assuming what your boss thinks or assuming what they want, ask them. Make sure you have those one-to-ones or those regular meetings with a manager or, like with your lead, and just say, how am I doing? Ask for the feedback, and don't make the assumption that you're doing what they want you to do. Ask the question.
Great point. And we are almost out of time. I'm going to throw in my 2 cents in 15 seconds or less. And that is, first of all, I always thought of hustle as a positive word. I can see now how it's being sort of over hustling being a problem. I do think that there's a law of diminishing utility. And if your days are too long, you will become less and less effective, less and less focused, and your work product will suffer, as will your sleep, your health, everything else. So there comes a point where you have to be able to figure out what's most important, what has to get done today, what is less important or can wait. And learning time management, delegation, and prioritization is useful in life anyway. So I do think there's a point where you have to call it quits and take a break, because otherwise you're not going to put out good work anyway, candidly. So
Yep.
we are out of time. Kristen, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
for doing this. I know we have lots of clients whose kids are either underemployed or trying to fight this battle like a salmon upstream, or just simply aren't sure what's next. I hope they will call on you. And if there are folks listening who want to get their kids started on the right financial footing, we can help with that too. And we're honored and delighted to do it. So thanks everybody for being with us this morning or this evening, depending what time you watched it. And we will see you again next time. Take care all.